Okay, recording has started. So, welcome everyone. Thank you again, once more, for being here on time. And with no further ado, I'll give the floor to Connor, our expert for this module in the course. He's going to talk about school as a learning organization, and he has a lot of experience on this topic, mainly also related to the work that he has been doing on a project called ITE Lab. But I'm sure he will talk a little bit more about it. So I won't waste his time talking about him. So, Connor, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Ruth. And thank you, colleagues, for joining us for this, the first webinar in the series for the Module 2. I'm very pleased to have two colleagues joining me for part of the activities. They're both experienced teachers. Victoria is, you can see, has her camera live at the moment. If you'd like to give a little wave, Victoria, there, thank you. Excellent. And she will introduce herself very briefly. And then on the other side, we have Donal. Both experienced teachers, both very different roles, but I think once you hear them speaking, you'll see that together we make a nice team in relation to this very challenging and I hope very interesting area of activity. I decided to start this with one of my favorite pictures, one of my favorite slides, because I'm very much a believer in the fact that teachers make their own spaces and make their own realities. So we take all of these raw materials, we take all of these ideas, and we use our skills to turn them into something very different. And it's a craft, it's an art, it's a profession, it's called different things in different ways. But the reality is that really what we build our schools, really what we build are organizations of people, really what we build are groups that work together for the learning of all of the community. And that's my starting point, in a sense, for what we're going to cover this evening. So without further ado, I'll simply move on to the title of the talk. Schools as Learning Organizations, Building Your Own. Now, this is an introductory module. It's and it's an introductory webinar leading to an introductory module. So we're at the very beginning of something here, I think, in relation to the next week and week and a half, in fact, when we include the second part, the second theme. So I'm very pleased that Victoria has been able to join us because she's one of the team that's running the second theme of the module. And I thought it would be very useful and very beneficial to have Victoria with us for this evening. You'll see that she'll offer a sort of a bridge, if you like, between the modules, but also focusing on what we've got to discuss tonight, which is this idea of a learning organization. What is a learning organization? Are schools learning organizations, and if so, in what ways? Now, this is part of an ongoing conversation that we've been having in and between a number of projects that are currently running out of the EUN. So the module series, this is the second in the series of the modules, and it's really focusing on the whole concept of eTwin schools. It's meant to help many of you participants come to an understanding of eTwin schools and what it is that makes an eTwin school a very special sort of place. We had a few successful applications for the title last year. We're hoping to have many more this year, and I'm certainly hoping that many of the people who are participating in this module will be among that group when we get to that point of the year. So very briefly, I'm not going to say too much about ITE Lab, other than the fact that it is another project which is running currently out of the EUN. We're interested in working with beginning teachers, young teachers, teachers who are just about to graduate, and we're having some very interesting conversations there on some of the same ideas. What it is to be a learner, what it is to be a teacher, and what our schools are in relation to organizational structures, how they can help us, and unfortunately in some cases hinder us in our job, in our role as teachers and teacher professionals. So we've two broad areas, if you like, to cover this evening. The first is the notion, the question, the basic question, what is a learning organization? And why should schools, particularly eTwinning schools, work for this idea or for this ideal? And then the second sort of area that we'll focus on a little bit is the power and the possibility of this for our schools. If we are to become learning organizations, what does it mean for our schools? And we'll have some ideas, I hope, as the conversation goes on tonight and into the coming week in relation to those two topics. I will be asking Victoria and Donald particularly to comment on the second, the power and possibility of this for our schools, what we can do in the school level, what they are doing in their own schools, the ideas that they are working with um, in and around this concept of the learning organization. We will then have an open forum where we take some questions and comments from the chat line. Now, it's not going to be possible, unfortunately, to open the microphone tonight to participants, but if you have questions or comments, please type them as we go in the chat line um, down here, where it's now very much live. I see a lot of people saying hello to each other and so on. But as we kind of push through the webinar, please feel free to put your comments, your thoughts, your questions into that space. And we will keep watch on that as we move through and make sure that we respond to those questions when it comes to the open forum part of tonight's session. So, the question that occurred to me when I was asked to take this seminar on first was, why now? Why are we seeing so much talk in the past sort of 6, 8, 10 months about this idea that schools are or should be some form of a learning organization, depending on whatever we understand that to be? Well, I think part of the answer is in the slide in front of you just presently. Both are important policy documents. Now, as teachers, we don't probably spend a lot of time reading policy documents, but they are useful. And I will put links to both of them in the working space of the Moodle as we go ahead. In fact, one is already in there for some of the early risers. But they're interesting for a number of reasons. Firstly, when you see the European Union policymakers and the OECD policymakers starting to talk about the same thing, it usually means that something quite interesting is going to happen. And that's, I think, why we're seeing a lot of activity in this space in the past while. It has become a hot policy topic. The concept of a school as a learning organization is being built up, is being developed by policymakers at both the EU level and also within the OECD. And very interestingly, from my perspective, the OECD work is based on previous work that was undertaken about 2 to 2.5 years ago by UNESCO. So effectively, what we're seeing here, folks, colleagues, is the start of a push at policy level from all of the big major players that reckon they have a stake in helping teachers understand what teaching is all about. Now, that's a contestable sort of comment. And there are people who would say, well, you know, what do OECD know about anything? I'm not going to go there tonight. We'll have that conversation sometime when we meet at an eTwinning event somewhere in the real world. But for the moment, I think it's enough to take for at face value, if you like, this idea that learning organizations are coming at us. And of course, that has to be a good thing, doesn't it? I'm not so sure it is. I'm not so sure, I'm not totally convinced that it is actually a good thing in and of itself. And my reservations are partly to do with the different understandings that are coming into play about what it is to be a learning organization. So that's what I'd like to explore tonight. What a learning organization actually is, where the idea has come from, and why we can, if you like, maybe take it, but not take it in its totality. Because when we look at the origins of most understandings of the learning organization, they don't come from within an educational background or setting. They come from the picture on the left, which, as it happens, is a Lego factory in China. But it's pretty much typical to have an idea that is developed in and through industry in the past while, then suddenly emerging as an educational idea. So my argument would be that what you see on the left is an organization, absolutely. What you see on the right is an organization. Are they the same type of organizations? Very much the answer to me would be no. But can the same values and practices apply to both? Again, I'm not totally sure. The kind of bottom line question for me is, well, do they actually have anything at all to say to each other? And in that regard, I am pretty certain, yes, they do. So maybe not as much as a lot of the policymakers would like us to think, but certainly there is a conversation to be had, and certainly there are some very good ideas that have come out of this whole area of policy and policy work in relation to what a learning organization is. And much of this has come from the industrial and the business world. So I have asked Ruth to load up a short video for us. Ruth, if you're there at this stage, it would be a good moment perhaps to play the video through. Can I ask you colleagues to watch the video and then think about, some of you have probably seen this already, think about the main message that's actually coming through. What message do they want to put forward? What do they see as the characteristics, the main ideas that refer to learning in a business learning organization context? So I'll pause there. The video is about 4 minutes long, and we'll play it through. Ruth, I'll see, can I
A
start
learning
on my
organization encourages personal mastery and cultivates
Please let me know
open
if you can
feedback
hear
to
the
see
video
problems
sound.
and opportunities on all levels. Some argue that learning organizations attract and retain more talents. Others say that there is a competitive advantage for an organization whose people learn faster than the people of other organizations. Here are 6 characteristics most have in common. They cherish an open culture. Learning organizations encourage everyone to share information, admit to mistakes, and practice giving and taking constructive criticism. Once the problem is found, they try to understand its root cause and fix it. To achieve such a culture, walls are removed, information is shared, and leaders show their human sides. They design and implement feedback loops. Some establish 360-degree surveys in which people assess themselves, their peers, and their bosses. Employees at 5-star hotels ask guests for their opinions. Top schools may videotape teachers so they can later study themselves. Some even make feedback a team effort. Before any new project, they all get together to kick things off. After the project, they meet again to share and reflect on what has happened. They promote personal mastery. Employees try to achieve personal mastery in their fields. Once they become experts, they feel proud of their work. They are motivated intrinsically, and they can create positive change wherever they are. For example, a cleaner might come up with an idea on how to save water, and an accountant on how to save bank fees. The job of the boss is to connect all experts and give directions. They plan for intelligent fast failure. When they build something new, they don't spend time to make assumptions on paper. Instead, they create what's called minimum viable product, a simple prototype with only the core functions. This is then presented to users as early as possible to test what they think. Because it is imperfect, even friends give their honest opinions. The goal? Fail fast, but collect intelligent information so you can improve while going forward. They steal best practices. Picasso apparently said that good artists borrow, great artists steal. Learning organizations study others, steal best practices, and then implement them fast. The newspaper The Economist took advice from George Orwell. Its editors never use jargon if everyday English works. Printing manufacturers stole the razor and blades business model from Gillette, selling printers cheap but ink expensive. they cultivate a common vision. A learning organization prospers when all members share a common vision. That way, employees can understand the importance of their role, connect the dots, and develop systems thinking. When goals are clear, regulations can be reduced and people can create their own personal benchmarks of success. This reduces bureaucracy, authority, and corruption. Salesman and author Zig Ziglar once wrote, "The only thing worse than training people and having them leave is not training them and having them stay." At a learning organization, education happens as a side product of working together, as everybody learns from each other to adapt to whatever the future might bring. If you like our videos and want to support our channel, visit us at patreon.com/sprouts and see if you want to donate just $1. With your support, we plan to create many more minute videos about learning and education.
Thank you, Ruth. And if we can go back to the actual meeting layout. Okay, thanks very much indeed. Okay, folks, I notice from the chat line that a number of people have seen it already, and I'm pleased about that. It was put into the original package that we sent out in terms of people might want to have a look at it to start the conversation. We thought it would be good to just play it again tonight for two reasons. Firstly, to let people see who have not had a chance to see it already, and then to think a little bit about it. And I've asked each of our panelists, both Vittoria and Donal, to have a little think about what's going on there. Now, while each of them is going to give a short response to what they've just seen and offer some additional ideas, please feel free to add your own thoughts and your own comments in the chat line as they speak. And we will come to those as the session develops as well. So can I start please with you, Vittoria, if you want to open your mic there and come in. What do you make of that? What do you think of the message that's carried through that video? Does it speak to your heart? Does it speak to your head?
Good evening, everybody.
What would you like to share with us on it?
So this video is it stimulates me a lot because there are many things that are absolutely useful for school and some other things that should be adapted to school. I really like the concept of open culture because this is a globalized world, and so we need to open our culture. We need to share because sharing is caring, and we can learn from each other. And like in the constructivism, my mental map connected to yours creates a widened and more effective mental map. But we have to preserve our roots and enlarge them. I really like the concept of best practice sharing. That is something that each eTwinning school should do and should have in their normal everyday life, because every teacher have their personal backgrounds, their personal perspective and their personal vision and the personal mastery. So this best practice sharing, that was, I think, one of the last points, I think should be the base of our growing, our possibility to grow. And for sure, I completely agree on the common vision of the education. So we have to share our vision, staff, principal, and community, because only if we walk on the same path will be easier to help children acquire the competencies needed for their life. So we have to make some questions inside the school. Where are we now? When when we would like to go, and what's inside, what would you have to do. So the common vision, I think, is one of the most important part of the video, even if I'd like to preserve the divergent thinking, because we should have a common vision, we should have a common goal, but we can help each other to do it in a different and creative way. I'm a creative people, so for this reason, I really like divergent thinking that can be connected to other perspectives, but to reach the common goal. I'm a little bit perplexed about the intelligent failure, because I think that education is a step-by-step process, and we need to adapt day by day according to the needs that emerge in every moment. We need to adapt our action according to children's needs, according to their learning. And so I think education is a different process.
That's very interesting, Vittoria. I noticed just as you're speaking, Anastasia has actually made a comment in the chat line in relation to exactly the same topic. She talks about intelligent fast failure.
Yeah.
Says, great. It's not just about planning and blah blah time, but about implementation. So I think you're saying very much the same thing in that regard. Not something that we really think about in educational terms. And perhaps there's an argument for thinking of a different type of fast failure, being the reflection in practice that we do on a daily basis in our schools. Did you say you had any other reservations about that's you see that as a little bit of a drawback, and I actually agree. I think this is something that I would worry a little bit about. The other thing I would worry about is the comment that was made about top schools recording their teachers, as if none of the rest of us actually do it at all. So and the idea there that the schools record the teachers is what I have a problem with. I think that what we really need is teachers who record each other and who record themselves if we're going to go down that particular route as part of learning development. But again, I think a good start in terms of observations. And there are some other thoughts coming in on the line which we'll pick up in a moment. But I'd like to, particularly I see about open culture. A lot of people like the idea of videos. They like the idea of speaking about open culture, and they like the general tone and so on. Donal, can I go across to you at this stage and ask you for a couple of thoughts, chasing both what Vittoria has said and what you think yourself about the video we've just watched?
Thanks, Connor. I must apologise to people. My head isn't usually this big, but I'm sitting quite close to a mobile device. So for future webinars, I think I'll have to go back to the PC. Good evening, everybody. I notice some of my colleagues here from Ireland are joining us, and they're much more experienced in this field than I am because they're eTwinning schools. But for my part, overall, I suppose not to over analyze the video.
Yeah.
I liked it. I liked it. In general, I liked it. And some notes that I took in relation to our own school here, and how we have related. I suppose very often schools progress because they have to look at their own context and their own culture. And unlike business, what works for the Lego factory may work for the next leading manufacturer in cars or watches or Fitbits. Schools can look to other models, but we're dealing with a contextual situation, different students, different geographical, different socioeconomic. So sometimes we adapt, sometimes we copy. The open culture I like, and we have certainly an open culture in the school. We have an open door policy for parents. Our teachers have started teaching in the recent number of years, some of them with the doors open. And if you ask them why they've the door open, they can't tell you. But sometimes you do things for the right reason because it feels good. Now, with the door open, you're breaking down that immediate barrier that Donald O'Reilly or Conor Galvin doesn't have to knock on the door to enter. And it becomes just like your house at home, that you can feel free to walk into the classroom. The next step is peer observation, although in Ireland we daren't call it peer observation because it's like a boogie word. But when I want to speak to Conor and his door is open, I'm in there and I'm observing. I'm not recording. And the one thing I suppose I would dispute a little bit about the recording. I think the recording of a teacher sometimes sounds like a great idea, but to what end? Why are you recording it? Where are you going to store it? And will it ever be watched again? Um,
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with that, Donal, and that's the reason, in a sense, why I said if teachers are going to record, if they're involved in recording, it could be to do with good practice, it could be to do with improving their own practice. That's a good reason to do recordings, but much less so if it's somebody telling you they are going to record you. It is a decision that every teacher must make for herself, and I think has to be part of the conversation we have with ourselves and others in that space. Donal, I noticed that we're getting a couple of comments about low audio. So although you might feel your head is a little big, perhaps if you speak slightly closer to the microphone, we might benefit a little bit from that.
okay,
But
how's that?
basically,
Is that a bit better?
that's much better indeed. So, colleagues, if you like to look at the slide set for the moment, if you just like to return to the idea that's actually been put out there. Those are more or less the 6 characteristics that were brought up. The idea of cherishing, the idea of designing and implementing feedback loops and so on. We got some very interesting comments about personal mastery to do with job, and it struck me that it was very job related. It connected to your role and it was seen as almost like a pigeonhole, a box that you were put in. The engineers spoke to the engineers, the cleaners spoke to the cleaners, and then the managers brought it all together. I'm not sure that's how schools work, but perhaps I'm a little bit naive on that one. I see a comment there from Civic at the moment. The 6 characteristics are about continuous learning and critical thinking. I would absolutely agree, but there is one single word that I would challenge on that slide. I don't think it's ever about best practices. I always think it's about better practices and good practices. What you do in your schools, in my view, and particularly in eTwinning schools, is as good as it gets in most ways. So it's not about trying to find best practice from somewhere else. It's about trying to find good practice, stuff that will work, stuff that we can use, stuff that we enjoy doing, and sharing good practice, I think, rather than best practice. I think we can all agree, colleagues, that the comment about cultivating the common vision is, however, maybe the biggest single takeaway from all of this. If there is one reason to embrace this idea, it might be in connection to that. So I'm going to pause for a moment or two and allow you and allow our panelists both to have a look through the chat line for about a minute or two, just to see if there's anything, guys, that you want to pick up on from any of the participants. So, for example, I'm seeing just at the moment another comment from Anastasia, who's all into stealing. Okay, great. Provided we use that gentle definition of stealing, I hope. It's a very good comment, though. You know, that we don't have to invent everything. We can find these good practices. We can borrow them legitimately, and as Angela has just said, we take them and we turn them into our own.
Okay.
So Donal and Victoria, if you'd like to have a look, please, at some of the comments, or if anyone wants to raise any particular questions at this stage, please feel free to do so. Amy, best teachers are thieves. Okay. Feel free, Donald or
Just,
Vittoria, to
just,
pick up on any particular comments that you think
just one thing there, I
are
suppose,
worth
about
a note,
the stealing.
or that you want to follow on.
I think, and tying it back to eTwinning and what's being offered across Europe. Um, I know in Ireland, and I presume in a lot of countries, you know, they're small enough in the education circles, and especially with Twitter and social media, and very often we get hemmed in by our own country. Certainly, I would find our school has really taken a giant leap forward since we have started um, engaging with our European colleagues, engaging in webinars like this, and stealing or borrowing the good practices from there. Most recently, I was over in Brussels at at the Future Classroom Lab with 20 European teachers, and I came back with a load of resources, um, many technology-based resources that I would have thought I was well up in. And these are things that are doing the rounds in other European countries. So I do think the platform, the eTwinning platform, and to become an eTwinning school lends itself to this sharing of best practices, or for the word that we're using tonight, stealing.
Absolutely, thank you. And I do see a couple of mentions of eTwinning. For example, Zoe has who are involved in eTwinning learn very much from each other, and this can happen between schools as well. In an ideal world, that's what we're hoping for. The idea that the eTwin schools will connect with each other. Vittoria, do you want to chase anything
I think
particularly, or are you happy
Sophia
enough to move on at
wrote
this point?
something about self-reflection. That is another focal point that also emerged in the video. So metacognitive
Yes.
revision is another
Yes.
very important focal point, because our eTwinning school should be competencies oriented and also process oriented. And so this self-reflection, this metacognitive revision help us to become stronger and become aware of that know-how, become aware of our process to reduce error in another time and reproduce positive behaviors and positive actions. And this is another point in evaluation that I really appreciated in the video.
Yeah, I think that was a very, very good observation. And again, there was a small conversation between Sophia and Penelope about teachers definitely do sometimes record to watch themselves and to reflect and so on,
Yeah.
but it doesn't have to be about recording, and I agree. Observations are mentioned there. Observation, just seeing another teacher teach and having a professional conversation about it afterwards can be absolutely fantastic. And we will be doing a little bit of work on that as the week goes on. In the second of the two tasks that we're going to ask you to consider doing within the module topic, there is an opportunity to have a conversation like that with colleagues. Yolanda has made a very interesting point, I thought. Why are we always comparing schools with business organizations? I suppose, Yolanda, partly because that's what policymakers do. And I think we're not always 100% comfortable with it. I certainly am not, because I see them as very different. I would see both as organizations, but I think in a very different sense, in a very different way. So in the interest of moving along, I see a number of people are still typing, but we can come back to this later if we choose to do so. So the next idea I'd like to put out there is that basically there is another way, and that kind of follows very nicely from that comment about why do we always have to speak to and from an organizational business perspective. I realize this is a difficult slide to read. I'm not expecting you to read it. In fact, I just want you to get a visual sense of what's there, because this is the key model that's being put forward by the European Union and also by the OECD and also in relation to UNESCO. Very, very similar models, which in a sense have the student placed at the center, and then a number of characteristics relating to individual schools as they see them in a circle around those. And then on the outside of that again, you have this series of connections to a wider society. So that's the model that's been put forward in policy and in recent policy documents about what a learning school and rather a school as a learning organization can and should actually be. Now, we haven't time to unpack that completely tonight, but I have made a copy of it available to you in the resource area of the topic. And when you come in close, when you look at the center of the model, this is what we actually see. So there are these characteristics that are seen as essential to a school as a learning organization. They go round in a circle. None is more important than the other. They're all seen as equally part of the puzzle or the bigger picture. Again, it's a very, like all models, it is just a model, but I think it speaks a little bit more interestingly to schools and what schools are in a way that's slightly different from how we might view business organizations. So if you'd like to just have a look around that circle, students at the center, and then out around the side, developing shared vision. There's that idea and idea again coming through. Creating and supporting continuous learning opportunities for all staff. And again, perhaps that reflects a little bit on what we've been seeing and what we've been talking about in terms of reflection, in terms of research within the schools, promoting team learning, interesting, establishing a culture of inquiry, again a very interesting concept. What is a culture of inquiry? What makes a culture of inquiry different from a culture of teaching and learning? Is there a difference? Is it just different language? Embedding systems for collecting and exchanging knowledge about learning and knowledge for learning. That's an interesting one, and in many ways it could be very, very controversial. Learning with and from the external environment. And that again is where the school reaches out to the wider community, reaches out to the wider world, probably in the way that eTwinning has done for so many years, where you're actually reaching out beyond the immediate school, looking at other ways of seeing the world, other models, and other ways of thinking about schools and about education. The final one then, modeling and growing learning leadership. And I think that's an acknowledgement of the relationship of the teacher to the learning leader. And we are all learners, we are all leaders, but you need learning leadership as well as school leadership perhaps. And again, Donal and Vittoria, would you like to take a look at these, or have you any thoughts or comments in relation to this? Is it a more school-aware model? Is it a model that is better for schools? Are you happier with this perhaps than we might have been with elements at least of the previous model? And then we'll go to the chat line and see what colleagues have got to say. But can I put that question to you first? Donal, would you like to start this time? What's your reaction to what you see there? Is it real or is it just someone's pipe dream? And lean in and speak to the microphone, sir.
I suppose one quick comment about the previous model. I would use the a la carte approach to the previous model, and I think we can take what we want from the a la carte approach. This model, I think, it is very, very similar to our do JCT here in Ireland, but going down through it.
Yeah. Okay, Donal, can I just ask you to explain what JCT is, because most colleagues will not have heard the term.
Students of age 12 to 18, and they would traditionally do year 1, 2 and 3, and then year 4 would be a transitional year, and year 5 and 6 would be their senior cycle year. But we're undergoing significant change here at the moment in years 1, 2 and 3, and it's called the junior cycle reform. But it's very much based around this, and on the ground I can see it working already. Just going down quickly through that, there's a couple of things that jump out at me. I think schools, successful schools and good practice, you have to give staff, and that's going back to the business model, all staff, the administration staff, the ancillary staff, any assistants, teaching assistants, everybody should be involved in the vision, because it can't be the vision of the few. Because if you are going forward with the vision for the few, you will never get there. It has to be a real collaborative approach. Supporting continuous learning opportunities for leadership or managers, the easy option is not to do it. The easy option, because it creates disruption in a school. But the old saying, you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. You can't really get anywhere with really getting down deep, digging deep into the roots of being or creating or achieving your vision without allowing those teachers to get out of school, meet with colleagues, and begin to share. Collaboration is something that's a bee in my bonnet, because the word collaboration has been floating around for as long as I'm teaching. I'm teaching 22 years. And I think this year, after 22 years teaching, I think I've just started collaborating properly. So I think we often use the approach when we're writing in our plans, how we collaborate with our departmental colleagues and all that. But I think we're in our school. I think we're really only getting to the we're at the edge of it, and we're going to get better. But real collaboration. I won't go down through the whole lot, but yes, Connor. I think certainly this is more like our school, and certainly more like the progressive and the good schools that would be student centered. And student centered has to every single decision in the school, whether it's the entrance to the school, whether it's curriculum development, whether it's the food that's on offer, it all has to come back to the student and how the student learns.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll go to Vittorio in a moment, but just in one of the comments, a number of very interesting comments have come up in the chat line while you've been speaking, Donald. For example, there's a very interesting comment from Emilio about the need for critical thinking as a soft skill and a vital skill, and why is that not showing up so, centrally in terms of what we're seeing here? I don't have an answer to that. It is interesting that when you go and see the wider documents, it talks about these themes, what they call these crosscuts, and critical skills, critical thinking skills, certainly is mentioned as one of the 4 themes or the 4 threads that run through all of this, but it's not immediately evident in the piece. There was another very good comment from Jordi. Sorry, my apologies. I missed the second name, Jordi. But you mentioned this is all good. The common vision is all good, but how? How do we actually avoid uniformity? How do we keep the unique nature of the school if we're all going to be working on all of these things together? So it's a fascinating sort of question. Perhaps not one we can answer tonight, but I do think it's something that I'd be interested to see some reflections in the discussion as we go along. And I see Vasilis has made a very good comment also. Zoe is coming in on that. So before we continue with the chat line, can I go to Vittorio at this stage, please? Vittorio, this model, is it better for us? Is it school aware? Does it speak to you as a teacher, or do you have some issues and problems when you see something like this being put out as the answer to all of our nightmares?
So I absolutely prefer this model than the video we saw before, because it proposes a sort of school that is very close to my vision. I don't know if it's so close with the vision of many other colleagues that I can see every day during trainings and so on, but it is something that we should look at. It is something that we should focus on, because it proposes many different good ways to become a learning organization. I really like to focus on promoting team learning and collaboration among all staff. I'm a passionate teacher, and my school is an eTwinning school, but it's an eTwinning school after 5 years of very hard work, because at the beginning I was alone. And now we became an eTwinning school because we built together a learning process among colleagues. We share a lot of practice, and we try to learn together, even with internal job shadowing, and this helped a lot.
And I'm
Yes.
seeing
Otherwise,
exactly the same comment there from Monica. The power of collaboration when it's done exactly like that. So I think you are speaking the language of teachers in this one.
yeah, I think I'm speaking the language of the eTwinning passionate teacher. And I love this model because it's student-centered, is the human being center. And nowadays, we can't focus only on knowledge. We have to focus on the holistic growing of our students because they have many needs apart from knowledge. And so this model can help teachers to develop the future human beings because it's something that helps them to work together in a common path, respecting differences, of course, respecting differences, and respecting the divergent approach of some of us.
And perhaps, perhaps that's not always taken as seriously as it actually should be. So if we look down again, colleagues, Donald, Vittoria, if you have a look through the most recent comments in the chat line, is there anything there that you'd like to pick up on, or anything there that you'd like to echo? I see, for example, Emilio's come in. This is very much a central question. If teachers don't believe in some central vision, we have nothing. Nothing gets done. So I think, there are some interesting comments there. And Sophie's comment was very, very telling. She picked up particularly on the idea of what are you going to do with this? You're gathering all of this data. What is it for? Is it for curriculum or is it for something else? Well, Sophie, there's actually a very interesting discussion about that in the wider document. And I'm sorry to say that it's not targeted on curriculum. It's targeted on managing teachers' performance. So maybe not really good news. But like everything else, in eTwinning schools, we can turn these things to suit our own purposes. So it might be something that you'd like to spend some time talking about over the next week or so, as we in the chat lines and in the Twitter stream. So, colleagues, any comments or any questions that you want to respond to from the chat line particularly? We'll spend maybe just a minute or two on this because I'm aware time is moving along.
May I add just
Yes, of course. Yes.
one thing? To become a learning organization, and it is something that I will show in the presentation that the participants will see continuing the module. We need also to integrate with the ministerial action, and we need also to put black on white, make it formally, not just with passion, but also on paper, because we have to build the system and to normalize our good practice, not best practice. We normalize a common vision. Sometimes it's not possible, or sometimes it's not understood that we need to put on paper this system. I don't know if does it make sense what I say?
It makes perfect sense. And again, information is power, and part of what we do in schools is we gather information. It's what we do in eTwinning schools with that information that I think is an interesting challenge for us. Donald, did you want to have any particular comment, or will we move along at this stage? I see a comment there from Ronald O'Sullivan. He's just come in on eTwinning schools and ambassadors and so on. But do you have anything you want to follow up with?
One of them is the looking to the managers, the principals, the leaders to lead this, and it really has to come from the top down, and the teachers that are involved in this needs to be supported by principals and managers. The problem is that leadership is still a new word in Irish schools, and the ministry is forcing us every day into management.
Yeah.
And it takes a real leader to get beyond that. So I think I agree with the people who have passed comments there that certainly this has to come from the principals down. The second thing, and it's something that was pointed out to us many years ago when we started this, that systemic change in a school takes 15 years. And 15 years is a long time in education and a long time in the school. And to refresh yourself and to refresh the one teacher or the teams of teachers in schools who are driving to strive to this vision, you have to stop and take a snapshot in time once every year at least and ask yourself, are we in a better place today than we were this time last year or this time 6 months ago? And if the answer is yes, then you're doing the right thing. But you do have to stop and evaluate that, because it can get very frustrating, and the leaders want to get there fast, the visionaries want to get there fast, but you must bring along the critical mass, and that will take up to 15 years to get there.
Agreed, absolutely. And that's actually probably a good time to move on to the next stage of our webinar. There are some really interesting comments starting to come through in the chat line. Colleagues are agreeing with you to a point, agreeing with both of us to a point, agreeing with Victoria particularly in terms of the comments she has made. And then there's comments in there about black sheep, people who break the rules slightly, what it is to be a really good leader. There's thoughts in there about how eTwinning can connect with Erasmus and so on. But just, Donal, if I can follow up on that point you made about taking an opportunity to take stock, to see where we are, to see what we're doing and how we're doing as a school. Perhaps the module that we're in currently in this eTwin school context is a useful opportunity to do just that. Now, participants have been asked to take on one or two small tasks as part of a portfolio they're building across all of the modules. These are the two tasks that I'm going to suggest for us to work on, for you to work on individually or together. In some cases, I understand that there are two or more teachers from individual schools working together. In a case like that, there's no reason why you can't take on the tasks as a single activity. In other cases, you might want to take them on individually, depending on how you like to learn yourself. So task one, which is the first one, it's gone live at this stage on the discussion board. And it relates to what we've just been covering tonight. So colleagues on the participant side, if you'd like to think a little bit more about this business world view that we've been discussing, you can look at the guidance on the task site, you can look at the various documents that we have put up, and can I ask you to bring your thoughts together on this and write a short paper. Now, 300 words is more than enough, 300 to 500 words. You will find a space in the forum where I'd like this to go in. Rather than a formal assignment, I think we'll put this in the forum so that each of us can see what others are actually thinking in the space. So that's the first task. There's no, it must be done by tomorrow morning kind of pressure on this, but if you could do it in the next day, day and a half, 2 days, I think it would be interesting to see what we have to say to each other about this space. The second task is slightly more complicated and will involve working with colleagues in your school. What we're suggesting is that you think about making sense of the learning values and the learning culture of your school. Maybe start by having a look at that model that we've just talked about last, looking at a little bit more depth and detail, the OECD UNESCO model, Schools as a Learning Organization, and then take perhaps one or maybe two of those dimensions we saw around the circle and ask yourself, does this happen in my school? How does it happen in my school? And what might we do in my school to get a conversation going over coffee or as a more formal event to start thinking about this? Now, there will be a little bit of extra guidance on the task available later tonight or tomorrow morning. But that's basically what we're suggesting for the two tasks. So if you have any questions, you can put them in the forum, or you can address them to me by email. Alternatively, you can pick up on our what we're going to call our conversazione that will take place over the next couple of days. Also, feel free to add your questions, your concerns, your answers to this strapline as well under the hashtag ETW Schools, not the full twinning word, ETW Schools 18. And we will be watching that for the next couple of days to see what sorts of points colleagues want to make and want to raise about schools as learning organizations. That, I think, is as far as I'd like to go for tonight. I did promise we'd be out within about an hour, and I want to honor that promise. Can I thank Vittoria and Donal both at this stage for their thoughts and their observations and their comments? Can I leave all of us with three little thoughts, like the three little pigs of legend? Three little thoughts about what we've done tonight, where we'll be going over the next week, and how we might move in the direction of being a more interesting learning organization at the level of the school. So I would suggest we start with the positive view, and there's a lot of positive view coming through in the chat line. What's involved and what's possible, what we can do and what's realistic, so without overstretching. The module will raise questions about this. It'll also point you towards some possible answers in the videos and in the online conversations, we hope, over the next week, and certainly into the second part of the module, the second theme, where we look at that huge challenge of integrating, making the school a more holistic place to actually be. The second point is this is about your school, folks. It's not an abstract study about schools and, education. We are hoping that you will direct this activity at your school. Use the learning tasks as ways to actually get those conversations going if they're not happening. And if they are happening, use these tasks to try and make those conversations better. So think about using the module as a way of helping you to start thinking and planning about how your school can be both two things. How it can be a better eTwinning school, because that's where we're going with the whole module structure and with this program, and I'm sure Ruth can confirm that. And also, can we make our schools better learning organizations as we take that journey forward? The final point I'd like to leave you with is the module has allowed us and you to connect to each other, to share thoughts and conversations. I must admit I'm very impressed by the conversation that is continuing in the chat line at this stage. And we might just leave that chat line running for another while, Ruth, if that's okay. Maybe for 10 minutes after we stop recording, after we finish the session. We might just leave the chat line running for another while to let people finish their points. So it's an opportunity to connect with other teachers. You're all eTwinners, you know this. So let's keep this conversation going over the week. Let's see, can we start the business of making our schools true learning organizations as opposed to kind of pale shadows of what, other people tell us we should, or perhaps firm conviction we absolutely must do. When someone tells me as a teacher that I must do something, I immediately want to do something else. And maybe that's just me, or maybe it's a characteristic of other teachers in other places also. So that's basically us. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. There will be free apple pie, I believe, going out in an email. So thank you for that conversation at the start. I'm looking forward to my slice of apple pie later in the evening. That's our hashtag, folks. eTwin Schools, ETW Schools 18. Please feel free to keep this conversation going. And again, thank you to both Donal and to Vittoria two super colleagues who have joined us to start the conversation tonight. So, Ruth, with that, we're handing back to you. By my calculation,
Thank you
about
for
54 minutes
keeping the
after we
time.
started. It's all yours. Thank
I
you.
would just like to confirm what you said before about the second point. We will definitely continue reflecting on this topic throughout the topics that we will continue working on the course. In the next topic, which will be led by Vittoria and Luigi, and also in the last module, there's a lot of reflection to be done. So please, I think you need to come back to this recording and to the documents that are shared at this moment and continue the reflection through the whole course. So yes, to confirm what you just said, Connor. One last thing, I'll do my best to share the recording as soon as possible on Moodle, but as you know, we are about to start the eTwinning conference, so all the eTwinning team is very, very busy with the organization of the eTwinning conference, so I'm very, very sorry if we don't reply as quickly as usual, okay?